The Attorney General testifies on Capitol Hill, facing accusations that he mischaracterized the Russia investigation to make it seem unduly favorable and to justify his decision not to go after President Trump for obstruction of justice. It's emerged that even Special Counsel Robert Mueller wrote twice to William Barr in March, expressing misgivings about the Attorney General's 4-page summary to Congress. Mueller said, quote, "There is now public confusion about critical aspects of the results of our investigation. This threatens to undermine a central purpose for which the department appointed the special counsel to assure full public confidence in the outcome of the investigations." The question now, what will Congress do about it? Speaking before the Senate Judiciary Committee, the Attorney General defended his actions, saying the president did not act with corrupt intent.
If the president is being falsely accused, which the evidence now suggests that the accusations against him were false, and he knew they were false, and he felt that this investigation was unfair, propelled by his political opponents, and was hampering his ability to govern, that is not a corrupt motive for replacing an independent counsel. So that's another reason that we would say that the government would have difficulty proving this beyond a reasonable doubt.
Now, the chair of the House Intelligence Committee, Adam Schiff, says the Attorney General is obviously biased and should step down. Congressman Schiff joins me from Washington. Welcome back to the program, Congressman.
Thank you. It's great to be with you.
So why did you make that call this morning, even before William Barr began his testimony?
Because it was clear before he began his testimony, when the Mueller letter was revealed, that he had deliberately misled the Congress. He was asked very specifically a couple weeks ago whether he was familiar with concerns that had been reportedly raised by the Mueller team about the accuracy of his 4-page summary. And Barr's answer was an unequivocal no. Well, that was false. He was aware of it because he spoke to Mueller directly about it, because Mueller put his concerns in writing. So that was a deliberately false statement. And coming on the heels of misleading summaries that he'd given the public, a false narrative he had supplied to the White House, his ability to be an impartial top law enforcement officer of the country has been so called into question. I don't think he can effectively serve as Attorney General, and I do think he should step down.
So before we ask you how you're going to manage that issue, let us play this particular piece of testimony that you've just referred to. It was in answer to Senator Chris Van Hollen of Maryland.
Because I'm not asking you what's in the Mueller report. I'm asking about your conclusion. Let me ask you this.
Well, it was the conclusion of a number of people, including me, and I obviously am the Attorney General. It was also the conclusion of the Deputy Attorney General, Rod Rosenstein.
I understand. No, I've read your letters, Mr.
And I will discuss that decision after the report is
Did Bob Mueller support your conclusion?
I don't know whether Bob Mueller supported my conclusion.
So it's tiny bit different than what you said. You said it was an unequivocal no. He said, I don't know. Do you still stand by the fact that that was misleading?
Well, actually, that's a different exchange that you played. The exchange I'm referring to was on the House side with Representative Charlie Crist, where Charlie asked him in a way that was uncannily similar to the contents of the Mueller letter, are you aware of concerns by the Mueller team that your 4-page letter essentially lacks the context, lacks an accurate summarization of the Mueller report? And his answer was no. That was directly false, and I think even more unequivocal than with respect to the Chris Van Hollen questions you just played back. So that's what I'm referring to.
Okay, so now you say that he should step down. What method is going to achieve that? Do you believe that Congress has the will, the power to start such a process?
Well, I mean, here's the dilemma that we face with an Attorney General not doing his job, with a president who we believe has committed various acts of obstruction of justice, and that is, there is no Howard Baker in this Watergate scenario. There is no Republican of stature willing to stand up to this president. And we saw, I think, on display among the Republicans on the Senate Judiciary Committee hearing an utter willingness to carry the president's water no matter how unethically the president behaves. The Republicans on the Senate committee were not interested in what Russia did in our election. They were not interested in why Bill Barr arrogated to himself a decision that Bob Mueller wanted the Congress to make about obstruction of justice. They're interested in going after Hillary Clinton still and talking about Hillary's emails. And in the absence of a GOP willing to defend the Constitution, defend our separation of powers, to stand up to this man in the Oval Office, our options for removing him are very limited. And so, you know, we haven't ruled out impeachment, either of the president or now of the attorney general. It is a serious undertaking, but we are also mindful of the fact that that would not be successful in the Senate when you have only one party willing to look at the facts and uphold its constitutional duty.
I mean, as you're considering and contemplating all of this, you know, you've described, you said that it was an unequivocal no, and he just said, you know, no about this thing that you now know he knew about. I mean, where does that stand? Is that obstruction itself? Is that a crime? What is that?
Well, you know, look, if it wasn't the Attorney General of the United States, the Justice Department would probably be looking at this as a potential perjury case. Now, there shouldn't be a different standard for the Attorney General, or if there should, it should be a far higher standard. We ask that people in the Justice Department, and I used to be one of them, avoid not just impropriety, but the appearance of impropriety. I think his ability to bring about public confidence in the result of investigations is now so seriously undermined that if he's interested in what's best for the department, he should step down. And here is another profound concern, and that is there are over a dozen cases that the special counsel has now spun off to other offices. That also may implicate either the president or people around him. We know about one in which the president has been referred to as individual number one, directing a corrupt campaign finance scheme. What confidence can the American people have if Bill Barr is the ultimate decision maker on those potential indictments? And the answer is little or none. And so I'm not sure what the remedy is, again, when you have only one party willing to challenge this kind of unethical behavior. But we're going to have to hold oversight hearings. We're going to have to use our compulsion, our subpoena power. We're going to have to use the power of the purse to hold the administration accountable in every way that we can.
Do you expect that the Attorney General will appear on Capitol before the House committees, the relevant committees, tomorrow, as he's been called to do? Do you think he will do that?
You know, I don't know. I think what we are seeing in the Senate is a display of the Attorney General's arrogance. And what we are seeing overall in this administration is a contempt for the co-equal branch of government, unwillingness to sit for any legitimate oversight. So the Attorney General now, with respect to the House Judiciary Committee, is trying to decide how he thinks the committee should conduct its business. Well, that's not for him to decide. The House Judiciary Committee will conduct its own hearing in the manner it believes is best designed to get at the truth. And that may be exactly why the Attorney General is so reluctant to come before the House.
And what about Bob Mueller himself? Where do you see that landing? I mean, presumably Congress wants to hear from him as well.
We do want to hear from him. We'd like to hear from him in the Intelligence Committee and also the Judiciary Committee. And I'm confident that's going to happen. But I think we're seeing the Attorney General take the same approach he's been taking for over a month now, which is delay getting the real facts to the American people as long as possible so that he and the president could put forward their own false narrative, because he knows that Bob Mueller's account is going to differ from what he is saying. So he wants his own narrative to sink in as long as possible. That's just the kind of unscrupulous conduct of the administration that we have come now, regrettably, to expect. So we're going to press to bring in Bob Mueller as soon as possible. I fully expect they're going to try to delay, but we will subpoena him if required, and we are going to make sure the American people get to hear directly from Bob Mueller, because they cannot rely on what the Attorney General says by way of characterization of his testimony.
I wonder whether you can sort of think about why this has suddenly happened and these questions raised about Bill Barr, because even former FBI Director James Comey spoke to me in April. It was after, Barr had received the Mueller report. And he, like many others, were giving the Attorney General the benefit of the doubt and speaking about his long-time record of public service. And this is what he said to me at that time, again, before it became public, but after he had received the report.
He is an institutionalist. He loves the Department of Justice. The only thing he has to lose at this point in his career is his reputation. I think he deserves the benefit of the doubt, and us, uncharacteristically, showing some patience to give him a chance to show us.
Just comment on that for me.
Yeah. Well, I have heard from a number of people who expressed very much the same thought that you just played from James Comey, that they wanted to give Bill Barr the benefit of the doubt. And now that they have, they regret having done so. Look, I think what we are seeing with Bill Barr is an abject example of the conundrum that anyone who serves this president faces, and that is, how do you ethically serve a deeply unethical president? And the answer is you can't. And Bill Barr failed that test worse than most. Why he wanted this job so badly to begin with is a mystery. I said at the time of his confirmation, he should never be confirmed unless he recuses himself, because he has such an obvious bias. So I blame the Senate in part that confirmed him. But we are now seeing that bias so vividly displayed, and not just with respect to his arrogating to himself to make this consequential decision about obstruction of justice, but now his lobbing out this incendiary term of spying, accusing the Obama administration of essentially spying on the Trump campaign. That is a Donald Trump campaign rally talking point. Bill Barr is smart enough to know just how charged that word is. And to see Barr again dissemble about this today, really, I think for anyone like Comey, who gave him the benefit of the doubt, they now have to conclude that Bill Barr is no better than Rudy Giuliani, maybe worse because he brought a certain stature to the job, but he is no different than anyone else acting as a spokesman or personal lawyer for the president.
It is quite interesting, though, to remember that Bill Barr and Bob Mueller have been longtime colleagues, but also friends. And these letters and apparently a phone call from Mueller to Bill Barr over what we've just been discussing, others have said shows the extent to which there's so much wrangling and sort of thought about how to deal with the investigation into this president and all the allegations. And particularly, I just want to play this little bit of Bill Barr today to refer to what you just talked about, aggregating to himself the final decisions to be made. This is what he said.
Bob Mueller is the equivalent of a U.S. attorney. He was exercising the powers of the Attorney General subject to the supervision of the Attorney General. He's part of the Department of Justice. His work concluded when he sent his report to the Attorney General. At that point, it was my baby, and I was making a decision as to whether or not to make it public, and I effectively overrode the regulations, used discretion to lean as far forward as I could to make that public, and it was my decision how and when to make it public, not Bob Mueller's.
I mean, that's a fact, right? I mean, that was his decision, and he played it out.
There actually were multiple false statements in what he just said. He wasn't required to override the regulations to make this public. He had the discretion to make it public. And indeed, he is not prohibited by law from making grand jury material available. He can go to court, as others have in his job in the past, to seek court permission to make that public, to make that available to Congress. These are choices Bill Barr made. Nothing was compelled here. He wasn't compelled to make a decision on obstruction of justice. He decided to do that himself. But what you also see displayed in that statement is his arrogance. Bob Mueller worked on this for 2 years, but he is nothing. He's my subordinate. When he gave me that report, it was mine to do with as I choose. He was done. In fact, we have learned he wasn't done. He was asked for his help in making redactions, making recommendations. So he wasn't done. He is still today on the payroll. But Bill Barr wants us to believe that Bob Mueller was simply an insignificant subordinate, and that in 48 hours, he had the ability, Bill Barr, to make this decision that Bob Mueller had to consider for 2 years. And I think we are seeing that kind of arrogance result in yet another grave disappointment to the country in one of the top officials in the country, and that is believing that somehow he is unanswerable to the public and the Congress. He can do as he will. He can ignore what Bob Mueller intended or meant. He can spin this on the president's behalf, and there's no repercussion.
Can you describe what you think in terms of the counterintelligence nature of this investigation? You know, we were told for a while that it was being characterized, particularly obviously on the Russia side, that this was as much a counterintelligence investigation as anything. Where do you stand on what has been revealed and how satisfied you are by the answers that have been given?
Well, this is a very key point because, as you mentioned, this began not as a criminal probe, but as a counterintelligence investigation to determine whether people around the president and ultimately the president himself as a candidate were somehow compromised by a foreign power, either wittingly or unwittingly. And indeed, the report does include some of that evidence. For example, you know, all of these contacts, all of what we colloquially refer to as collusion, is set out in the report, contrary to what Bob Mueller, contrary to what Bill Barr has to say about that. Innumerable contacts, injunctions by the president to find out what WikiLeaks had, all of that is deeply compromising. But what we don't have is the counterintelligence findings. Is that investigation ongoing? What happened to those counterintelligence agents embedded in Mueller's team and the reports they sent back to headquarters? Now, our committee has asked for those reports on a bipartisan basis. One of the few things that Devin Nunes and I agree upon. We will subpoena that information if necessary. There's a statutory requirement. They provide it to our committee. They have not upheld their legal obligations. So we're going to get answers to these questions, and they may be among the most important because, criminal or not, if a foreign power has leverage over the President of the United States that is dictating U.S. policy in a pro-Russian direction, that has to be exposed.
Let me just ask you a different issue about Russia, which I'm sure comes under your purview as intelligence. We know that Russia is taking advantage of America in places like Syria, and it's present on the ground in Venezuela. And the Secretary of State, Mike Pompeo, has said that, you know, with all the protests in Venezuela yesterday, the dictator Nicolas Maduro was prepared to leave the country. Apparently an airplane was prepared to fly him out, but was talked out of it by the Russians. Do you know anything about that? What more light can you shed upon that? And what does that say to you?
Well, you know, I can certainly confirm that the Russians have a significant influence and an important presence in Venezuela, that they are a malign influence there and are certainly doing what they can to prop up Maduro. In terms of the specifics that the Secretary of State mentioned, I can't comment on that. But this is an adversary that views the world in a zero-sum term. That is, anything that helps the United States is harmful to Russia and vice versa. And there's a particular interest, I think, in Maduro by Putin, and that is if popular discontent can result in the removal of Maduro, it can result in the removal of Vladimir Putin. This is why the color revolutions were so terrifying to Putin, why the Arab Spring was so terrifying to Putin, because it provides a model for the overthrow of autocratic regimes. So there are many reasons I think the Russians have a deep interest in propping up Maduro, not least of which they believe it is inimical to the U.S. interest, but also they are fighting this idea around the world that people can topple their autocratic rulers.
It's fascinating. Congressman Adam Schiff, thank you so much indeed for joining us.
Thank you.